Right. So, we move on to other combinatorial optimization problems. So, one of the fundamental problems that we have when we have to solve combinatorial optimization problems is that we may not know the complexity of the problem. As Professor PPC mentioned in the last lecture, that there are methods for proving the lower bound complexity of problems, and one of the ways to do that is through reduction. You reduce a known problem to your problem, and then you know that because I have a lower bound for that problem, I cannot solve this problem better than that. Because then that problem would also be solvable better. Now, while you have this kind of reductions for certain types of problems, there are also a lot of problems for which the lower bounds are just not known. So, we have to design algorithms without this knowledge. But if we do not design it smartly, we may end up by using an algorithm which is like killing a mosquito with a cannon, right. So, let us see that how to understand properties of certain types of problems, and then be able to find out that what would be the better algorithm for doing it. And it is not there is no thumb rule for that. You have to have some amount of understanding of algorithms, and then we try to use that and use our experience to get there. So, one example of such a problem that we are going to look at, which has lot of nice sub problems which can be solved much better, is a graph coloring problem. So, what is a graph coloring problem? I have a set of vertices in my graph, and I have to color these vertices with colors such that adjacent vertices do not get the same color, right. So, if some vertex is red, then none of the neighbors of that vertex can be red, right. Let us take a very simple example of where we come across a graph coloring problem. Suppose I want to find out for a set of students who have registered in different subjects, what is the minimum number of slots I need to schedule the exams, right. So, for example, in my department there are around 105 students in the BTech, and they have taken various electives. I want to figure out core subjects everyone has taken. So, obviously, core subjects in the graph will mean that from that subject I have edges to all other subjects, right. So, for core subjects I will have to give independent slots, but for the other subjects, when can I give the same slot to two different electives? When can I schedule two electives in the same slot? If there is no common student, right. If there is no student who is appearing in both of those papers, then I can put them in the same slot. Now, suppose I construct a graph where my subjects are the vertices, and I put an edge between two vertices if there is some common student in them. So, I put an edge between two vertices representing two different subjects if there is some student who has taken this as well as that, right. Now, you see there is a correspondence with the graph coloring problem where colors are my slots, exam slots, let us say exam days. So, if I schedule one subject in a particular day and I have an edge to another subject, then that subject cannot be put in the same day. That is, I cannot use the same color on both of them, where the color is the day, right. So formally this is a definition, that we have a set of vertices and a set of edges, and the coloring of the graph with a given k set of k colors is to assign to each vertex a number from 1 through k, where these 1 through k are the k colors which are at my disposal. That is, Fv denotes the color of vertex v, and we say that the coloring is proper if for adjacent vertices the colors are not the same. Right? That is, f of vi is not equal to f of vj. Now, my goal is to find the minimum number of colors with which I can do this. That is, I want to minimize k subject to this thing above. Right? Is that clear? Now, let us look at a problem. So, Indian Railways is planning to run a new train from Howrah to Chennai, and it wants to add some reservation quotas between selected cities. The number of berths needed in the quota from one station to another is shown in the table. So, what does, give me a moment please. What does this indicate? That is, I need to have a quota of 45 berths from Howrah to Bhubaneswar. Right? Why is it only an upper triangular matrix? No, not symmetric. Yeah, the train is going from Howrah to Chennai. How can you have a reservation from Bhubaneswar to Kharagpur? Right? That is why it is upper triangular. There is no meaning in the lower triangular values. It is travelling in one direction only. Now, we want to figure out that how many berths do we need in total in the train. How many berths will we need in total in the train? First of all, because I just now mentioned graph coloring, this is a graph coloring problem. But how? What are my nodes? What are my colors? So that this becomes a graph coloring problem. First of all, you try to see what am I going to minimize? Berths. In graph coloring problem, what do I try to minimize? Colors. So colors equal to berth, because what I'm just trying to use common sense reasoning, right? I want to reduce the number of colors. Here I want to reduce the number of berths. Professor is saying that this is graph coloring, so berths equal to colors. Then what are my nodes? So if I take a particular berth I and I take a berth j, right? Now berths are my colors, so these are not my nodes, right? These are my colors. So I want to color them with this many number of. Now what then will be my vertices and what will be my edge? So the problem is that a particular berth can be shared between two quota elements. When think of a berth in the train. If there is a quota from Kharagpur to Bhubaneswar and one from Vizag to Chennai, can I put them on the same berth? Yes. One from Kharagpur to Vizag, Bhubaneswar to Chennai? No. So, if there is overlap in the intervals, so if you can look at each berth, each reservation, then each reservation, so if I draw these in sequence, KGP, then Bhubaneswar, then VZM, and then VSKP, right, and so on. So, if there is some quota from here to here, then that occupies this interval, right. Now, there can be another quota which is from here to here. There can be a quota from here to here. There can be some quota from here to here, right, and some quota from here to here, and so on. So, these are all intervals. Quotas are intervals, right. Now, for each of these quotas, there is, it is not one, right. So, from Howrah to KGP, so from Howrah to KGP for this interval, there is not one berth, but how many? 10. So, you can think of this as actually 10 such intervals, right, 10 such intervals. And then between Kharagpur and Vizag, nothing, but between Kharagpur and Bhubaneswar, we have 45, rather yes, Howrah to Bhubaneswar. Howrah to Bhubaneswar, we have 45. Oh, this is Kharagpur to Bhubaneswar, we have 20. So, that you can think of 20 such lines, intervals, right. Now, do you see why this is a graph coloring problem? What will be the nodes? All these intervals, right. These intervals will be nodes, and I will put an edge between two nodes if the intervals overlap, right. Nodes are intervals, I put an edge between two nodes if the intervals overlap. Now, if I can color a set of nodes with the same color, that means that those nodes are not adjacent nodes. If they are not adjacent nodes, then they do not overlap. Then the vertices sharing the same color can be allocated to the same berth, physical berth in the train, right. Yes or no? Is it clear? But then there are a lot of nodes in this graph, right? 10 for this, 20 for this. What are we going to do? Are we going to create a graph of that size and then solve an NP complete problem on that? Right. So, see, you see, a problem which comes from a very real world typically comes with this kind of flavor. It will have large numbers, and then you start wondering that is that the best way to solve it? Am I going to now create a node for each of these intervals, 20 for Kharagpur to Howrah, 45 from where to where? Kharagpur to Bhubaneswar, and so on. That is a lot of nodes, right? And then if you look at the Howrah to Madras, it's not good at all. Now you see, this is where if you know a little bit of graph theory and graph algorithms, then that can help you here. So this type of graph that we see here, these intervals, the graphs which are constructed out of intervals, is a type of graph which is also studied in other subjects. For example, in compiler design, in compilers, in designing of compilers, when you have a sequence of operations on the same data item, you will try to move that data item into some register and then move it back only when all these instructions have executed, right? It is not a good idea that every time you read it, you do a change, then write it back into memory, because reading and writing from memory takes a lot of time, right? Now, if you take a particular variable and suppose you are able to figure out what is the span of its usage. So, I have a variables a, b, c, d, etc. So, a is used over this interval, b is used over this interval, c is used over this interval, then d is used over this interval, e used somewhere here, f here, and so on. So, these are the time spans over which the variables are used. That is, if you execute the code, then a is used from this time to this time, and so on. Now, you want to figure out how many registers will you need, so that you do not have to write back a variable before its span is over, right. So, this is called a register allocation problem. Now, you see that the variables c, e, and f can use the same register, because e will have to be brought into memory after c has been written back. F will have to be brought into memory after e has been written back. So, they can share the same register. So, I think if we put c, e, and f in one register, then a, b, and d will require three different, no, a and d can go in one register, right. So, with 3 registers we are done, right. Now, if you look at these intervals, and if you think of the number of the registers as colors, this is again the same problem that we are looking at. Now, as it turns out that this kind of graphs which are built out of intervals have a very nice property. The property is that if you look at the left endpoints of these intervals, let us say, this intersects with a, but this intersection is symmetric. If c intersects with a, overlaps with a, then a also overlaps with c. If you look at this point, b overlaps with a, b also overlaps with c, but then that also means that c overlaps with a. So, if you look at the left endpoints, or for that matter at any point, then you see that whatever ones they are intersecting with, they all form a clique. That is a complete graph, complete subgraph. Because at any point, if A is intersecting with B, B is intersecting with C, C is intersecting with D, then for all these pairs they are intersecting with each other. No, because that means that these intervals are overlapping. So they are all overlapping with each other. So if you look at the corresponding thing in the graph, where these A, B, C, D, E, F are vertices, and if you look at this point, let us say, then this tells us that B is intersecting with A, B is intersecting with C, but then C is also intersecting with A, right. So it is a complete subgraph. If you look at this part, B, D and D, B, D, E, they all intersect with each other. Right? How does that help us? Now, the number of colors that you need to color a graph, what relation does it have with the size of a complete subgraph? At least that many number of colors are required. So if there is a subgraph of the graph which has 10 vertices out of a total graph of maybe 15 vertices, if 10 of them form a complete subgraph, then I know that those 10 will have to be all given different colors, because in a complete subgraph everybody is a neighbor of everybody. So you cannot use the color on any two of them. So they will all use independent number of colors, right. But in general, the minimum number of colors required to color a graph can be more than this complete subgraph, right. And therefore, finding out a complete subgraph does not help, because the number of colors required may be even more than that. But for interval graphs, that is not the case. The interval graphs, if you can find the maximum sized clique, then that is also equal to the minimum number of colors. And now there is something that I would like you to look up. Is a greedy coloring algorithm. This algorithm is very simple. Let me work it out on any one of these graphs. Let me work it out on a graph, and then it will become very clear. What we do here is we start with any of the vertices, right. So we ordered these vertices in any way. So let us say that I order them as this is 1, this is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now what I do is I start with the vertex with minimum number, right? And let us say my color set is red, green, blue, yellow. If I need more, maybe orange. I hope I will not need more than that. So, I take the first vertex and I color it with the first color, that is red. Then I go to the second vertex and I see, can I color it with red? No. So, I choose the next color, blue. Can I green? Can I color it with green? Yes. So far, no problem. Now I go to 3. I ask, can I color it with the first color? Yes, red. I go to 4. Can I color it with red? No. Can I color it with green? No. So I go to the next one, blue. Right. Now I go to 5. Can I color it with red? Can I color it with green? With blue? No. Then I will use yellow here. Now I go to 6. Can I color it with red? Yes. Now I go to 7. Can I color it with red? No. Green? Yes. So now you have got the algorithm. What we do is, we order the vertices and then start coloring them one by one, and for each vertex we choose the minimum color that can be given to it, that is the minimum color that is not used on any of its neighbors. That is what we give to it. This is the greedy coloring algorithm. Now, this greedy coloring algorithm normally does not give you an optimal number of colors. It can use more colors than that is actually needed. But for this special type of graphs, which are derived out of intervals, are called interval graphs, as it turns out that this gives the optimal solution. This gives me the optimal number of, right. Now, what I will leave you here with, and we will move on to other things, is can you use this greedy algorithm on this matrix that we have drawn here without actually creating that graph? That's the thing that I would like you to do, right? Try to find out the minimum number of colors to be used here without actually creating that graph. If you understand it well, you can just examine this matrix and tell me what is the minimum number of colors. That is, in other words, what is the minimum number of births that is required, right? And if you cannot figure it out, yes? No. No. You think about it, you will be able to figure it out. No, don't guess, please. You not only have to figure it out. See, my problem is easy. I just leave it to you and say that you figure it out. But you will have to prove it to your student, right? So, I mean, that's the advantage, as Professor PPC said, of talking to teachers. You are getting very close. Yeah, you are getting very close. Yeah, I know. Don't say any more. Now, there is a whole lot of combinatorial problems which are interrelated. So, if you have an algorithm for one, you can easily use that to solve the other, right. So, here are a few related problems from graph theory, and let us quickly see what they mean. The first problem says that find a minimum vertex cover in a graph, that we know what is a vertex cover. So, given a graph, I want to find a set of vertices such that a set of vertices, when do we say it's a vertex cover? It's a subset of the vertices which covers all the edges. That means that it picks up at least one endpoint of each edge, right? So, in this case, can you tell me what will be a minimum vertex cover if I number these vertices with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? What is the minimum vertex cover here? 1, 5 will cover everything? No. One 5, 7 will not cover 2, 3. Two, 5, 6 will not cover 1, 4. 1, 2, 5, 4. No, that will not cover 6, 7. Let us see 1, 3, 5, 7. Does it cover everything? So, 1, 3, 5, 7. Now, if you look at any edge, at least one endpoint of that edge is taken, right? Now, can you tell me something about the remaining vertices? They form an independent set. What is the meaning of an independent set in a graph? An independent set in a graph is a collection of vertices that have no edges between them. It is a subset of vertices which have no edges between them, right? Now, if you take any vertex cover, regardless of whether it is minimum or not, the remaining vertices will have to form an independent set. Why? Because if there was an edge between any of the two remaining vertices, then that edge is not covered by my set vertex cover. So, what I am saying here is that suppose I have my vertex cover as some subset of vertices q, right. Now, here are the remaining vertices, that is V minus q, the remaining vertices. Now, because this is a vertex cover, what does that tell me about these? That if there are two vertices here, if they have an edge between them, then this cannot be a vertex cover, because then this edge is not covered by this vertex cover. So, regardless of whether this is minimum or not, the other one, regardless of whether the vertex cover is minimum or not, the remaining vertices, if it is a vertex cover, then the remaining vertices will have to be an independent set. So, what I can say is that if V is a vertex cover, then if Q is a vertex cover, then V minus Q is an Now, let us look at the optimization aspect of this. then if this holds, then can I say that if I have found out the minimum vertex cover, then I have also found out the maximum independent set? Right? Now, this is the thing. See, these are complementary problems. So, if you are minimizing one, then you are maximizing the other, because the union of the two is fixed. It is like a two-player game, you know, where there is some common profit. The more that I get, the more you lose. So, if I can maximize my profit, I am minimizing your profit. So, if I have an algorithm for solving the minimum vertex cover in a graph, then I can use the same algorithm for finding a maximum independent set in the graph. And then I claim that I can also find the maximum clique in the graph, the maximum complete subgraph in the graph. What is a clique? Clique is a complete subgraph, right? A complete graph where every vertex is connected to every other vertex, right? Now, I say that if I have an algorithm which can solve these two, that is, it can find a minimum vertex cover in a graph or find a maximum independent set in a graph, then it can also be used to find out the maximum complete subgraph of a graph. Can anyone tell me how this can be done using the same algorithm? Yes, anybody else? Did you follow what he said? So, let us take a graph. Let us number this as 1, 2. Now, if this is G, then I define G complement as follows, that I will have the same set of vertices but the edges which are there in G will not be there in G complement. The edges which are not there in G will belong to G complement. So, 1 and 2 are adjacent here, here they will not be adjacent. 2 and 4 were not adjacent here, so I will put an edge between 2 and 4. I will put an edge between 1 and 5 because they were not adjacent, right. I will put an edge between 1 and 3. I will put an edge between 1 and 6. Five and 3. 2 will be adjacent to 6. 4 will be adjacent to 3. And 6. 5 will be adjacent to, it is done, right. Now, take any independent set here. Take a set of vertices like say this, this, this. They form an independent set. What do you see about them here? 1, 5, 3. So, an independent set in G becomes a complete subgraph in G complement. Why so? Because an independent set in G is a set of vertices which have no edges between them. But in the complement, what will happen? There will be edges between all of them. For all pairs of them, there will be edges, right? So, an independent set in a graph becomes a complete subgraph in the complement graph. So, how are we going to use the same algorithm to find a maximum clique in a graph? Suppose I have an algorithm for finding out vertex cover, minimum vertex cover. How am I going to use it? To find out an algorithm for finding out the maximum clique in a graph. I will take the graph, take its complement, find the minimum vertex cover, and the remaining vertices will be an independent set, maximum independent set. Therefore, in the complement graph, they will be the maximum clique. There are other such things also. So, the thing is that the more that you know the connections between these problems, that gives you the power of developing an algorithm for one of them and then using it for this entire class of problems. You can that is the beauty of being able to reduce one problem to another. So, there are a few more problems that I have here, but by seeing how silent the audience has become, I would probably leave these slides for you. These are other problems for which apparently combinatorial problems, because we do not know whether they are going to combinatorially explode or not. It turns out that when you formulate them in a recursive way, and then you can actually solve them using dynamic programming in polynomial time. But maybe I can give you just a problem statement, because that is interesting, and I will tell you a domain which is completely different from this, where we are using it. Shudipa is not here. Yeah. So, this is a sequence alignment problem, and I think Professor PPD mentioned one version of this problem. So, the thing is that you are given two sequences and you want to find out how much they match. And if you look at DNA sequences, then there are only these 4 symbols which represent the 4 different nucleic acids which constitute a DNA. And they have the codes which are called C, T, G and A. Right? Now, when I am matching it, I am allowed to match with gaps inserted in one sequence. So, here for example, this is one type of matching it. So, here I have matched C with C, T with T. For the G part, I have inserted a blank in this sequence. Then G with G, A with A, C with C. Here C and G do not match, but I said that okay, let us ignore that. Then T and A, they do not match, but I ignore it, and then AA, CC, GG. Now, see, there is a penalty with each mismatch, like when I have C with G and T with A here, these are mismatches, and then I associate some penalty with these mismatches, this one and this one, these are mismatches. And then here there is some gap which is introduced, which is also a mismatch, but these are two different types, because here I am actually substituting one character by another. Here I am not substituting, but inserting a gap in one of them. And then the problem statement is that if a cost is defined as the cost of 3 components, here delta is the cost of inserting a blank, and this is the cost of mismatch between a C and G, which is what we have here, and this is the cost of a mismatch between T and A, which is what we have here. Now, if this is my definition of cost, I want to find out what is the maximum alignment that I can get, that is an alignment of minimum cost that I can get between these. No? Somewhat similar to the edit distance which Professor PPD was referring to that day. And then you can do a dynamic programming formulation, which as I promised, I am not going to discuss here. But let me tell you about a domain which is completely different from what we are talking about here, where we are using this thing. And the domain is in the area of Indian classical music. So, in Indian classical music, we have a system of ragas. Now, for each raga, there is a grammar, and the similarity with computer science is quite fascinating. So, a raga has a grammar. What kind of grammar? What are the alphabets? So in the entire universe, at least in Earth, music is made out of 14 notes. Sa, then there are 2 rays, Komal ray and Shuddh ray, then 2 gas, 2 mas, 1 pa, 2 dhas, and 2 nis, right? So, 1 octave to 1 octave, we have these 12 notes. 12 notes. Did I say 14? No, 12 notes. I meant 12 notes. So, one octave has these 12 notes. A particular raga is a subset of that. So, in a raga, you are allowed to use only some of these notes. So, that becomes your sigma, the alphabet. You can choose notes only from that sigma. And then there is a grammar of the raga, which tells you that when you are moving up the octave, what are the sequences in which you can use the notes. That is ascending sequence, which is called arohan, and the avrohan is the descending sequence. But this is all that you will find in a book. But in reality, when it is taught from one guru to the student, there are a lot of phrases which bring out the essence of the rag, the signature, which is not documented. But the Maharashtrian system of music, they have a thing called a ragang paddhati, by which they can identify certain, they have for each rag a set of phrases, which when you use judiciously in the rendition brings out the flavor of the rag, right. Now, here is the problem. Somebody has rendered something, and you are given the note sequence of that. Now, you want to say that how good a rendition of the rag Yaman is this, right. Now, you take these phrases from the ragang paddhati, it may not be the case that people are using exactly that sequence. There might be these gaps, these minor substitutions. See, there is an element of goodness and badness in the rendition, because the person who is rendering it may not be an ustad, right. He may be making mistakes, but still he might be bringing out very good essence of the rag, right. So, there we have the sequence alignment problem, and we use that to score and build a recommendation system where you can look at the notation of the rendition of a person and say that this is a good faithful description of this rag, and this is well not so good, right. So, as we had promised in the morning, that we will now break away from what we are doing here and talk about this new style of solving combinatorial problems by reducing the problems into SAT, right. Please, a disclaimer, please do not mistake this as showing that the problem is NP complete, because to show that a problem is NP complete, you reduce SAT into your problem, right. or you reduce a known NP-complete problem to your problem. Here we have a problem, we are modeling it in SAT. Our problem may be easier than SAT, or it may be, can it be harder than SAT? If it is harder than SAT, then the reduction may create a blow-up. Otherwise you will not be able to reduce it. Otherwise it will have the same complexity as SAT. But even when problems are easier than SAT, by modeling it into SAT and leveraging the SAT solvers, you may be able to solve very big instances of this problem in lesser time. So we will spend a little bit of time. I will hand over to Antonio. He is going to take you over 1 or 2 reductions of known problems in SAT. And then we can point you to some of the SAT solvers that are there today, so that you can try out some of these and see how good they really are. Every year there are competitions which are held to determine which is the best SAT solver in current practice. Right? It's a very competitive competition and lot of submissions, and it is not the case that the same team wins every year. In fact, it's rarely the case.
Okay, so my duty now is not to give you all solutions to these problems, is to make you all actually do some work. Okay, so we are going to work through some examples of problems we have already seen, but look at them from a different point of view. Okay, and that is from the point of view of SAT. So why do we actually use these reductions, what we call reductions? So one thing that we all know is that if we know the solution to a problem, then we use reduction to reduce instances of problems that we don't know how to solve, but look like something that we know how to solve. We reduce it to that, solve the problem we know, and then make a reduction back, convert the solution of the problem we know to the solution of the problem we don't know. Right? So that is one use of the reduction. Another use of the reduction, as you have already seen in the past classes, is to prove that problems are NP complete. So to prove a problem is NP complete, we take the problem, prove it is in NP first, and then you prove that some NP complete problem can be reduced to it. Now the third issue is very interesting, and that is to use SAT, which is actually an NP complete problem. And we reduce things that need not necessarily be NP complete, may even be polynomial time solvable. We reduce those problems to SAT. Okay, and we'll look at some examples of those. So there is a problem called perfect matching. All right. So we have looked at, so these are all graph problems, and we have looked at vertex cover. We have looked at a matching. So a matching here in the graph. So matching is shown in the graph here. It's between the edges, between the vertices 1 and 5 and 4 and 3. So matching is a set of edges such that no two edges in the set have a common vertex. If I take a set of edges and no two edges have a common vertex, we call that a matching. So let's take an example and I'll explain this to you all. All right. So in this graph that I have drawn, which edges would form a matching? Which edges would form a matching here? So let's say I chose V1 and V2 first. Can I add V2, V3? No, because if I add V2, V3, V2 is common. V1, V4 faces the same problem. So I can add V3, V4. If I add V3, V4, I cannot add V4, V5, nor can I add V3, V5. right? So I can either do this, or I can choose an edge from here and add it. Okay. So V1, V2 and V3, V4 form a matching. Now in addition to the definition of a matching, you have something called a perfect matching. A perfect matching is a matching in which every vertex in the graph is hit on by at least one of the edges of the matching. I'll repeat, every vertex of the graph is hit upon by at least one edge of the matching. You can't have more than one edge hitting upon the vertex, otherwise it's not a matching, right? So in this graph with the matching I have marked, is it a perfect matching? No, because V5 is left what we call unsaturated. V3 is saturated because it is touched upon by an edge of the matching. Okay. So this is the problem we are going to try and solve. So what is it? We are given an undirected graph and we are asked whether the graph has a perfect matching. And I need you all to look at this problem, look at the entities in the problem, that is the graph itself, the vertices, the edges, and tell me how would you reduce this problem to an instance of Boolean satisfiability. So if I talk about Boolean satisfiability, what do I have? I have Boolean equations, I have Boolean variables which can take either the true form or the negated form. I have conjunctions, I have disjunctions. Now you are free to choose the variables that you want and you are free to choose the Boolean equations under the constraints of the problem. The reason is that what you will essentially do is you will take your problem, P and you will convert it into an instance, of SAT. So this is my problem instance of SAT. I will then give this problem instance to what is called a SAT solver. This SAT solver will then give me an output which is an assignment. X1 is true, X2 is false, and so on up to Xn, something false or true. It will give me an assignment. And then you have to interpret that assignment to be your solution. So this is then interpreted as a solution to the problem P. All right. So this is the objective. So could you tell me what will be your variables? What will be the Boolean variables? What will they represent? Yes? Yes, the edges, correct. And what else? What else can you say about that? If you have the edges representing the variables, then what would be your constraints? If it is matching, then yes. So an edge will be chosen, and if it is chosen, that means that my variable will be assigned a value of true. That's right. I mean, that's the correct interpretation. What will my constraints be? Because I have to write these as Boolean equations. Each vertex will be a clause of what kind? What will you write? Could you put your hand up? I can't. Yes. The AND of the edges which are incident, but then if you put the AND of the edges, then you are essentially saying that every edge has to be selected. So let's draw it out, okay? So if I have a vertex V and I have edges E1 going somewhere, E2 and E3. So somebody here said that it should be each clause should be a vertex, right? And what does the clause contain? What do you write? If I put E1 and E2 and E3, and my interpretation is, as was given here, that it is if the edge is chosen, then E1 is 1, otherwise it is 0. So if I put that as an AND, then that means that all should be chosen, either of them, right? And it should not just be either of them, it should be exactly one of them should be chosen, because if any more than one is chosen, then I no longer have a matching. Okay? So what will my equations be? So for example, in this graph, as you see, with edges E1 through E8, my variables are the edges, as was mentioned, and my constraints are as follows. For each vertex V, you have to check that exactly one edge is chosen. So here for the vertex 1, you have either E1 is chosen, E2 is not chosen as indicated here, or E1 is not chosen and E2 is chosen. Similarly, for vertex 2, you have various combinations in which one is chosen, the others are not. Similarly, for vertex 3, 4 and 5, 6. So you have these set of equations. So you take these set of equations and you say you feed it into your SAT solver. The SAT solver will then directly give you an answer saying E1 is true or false, E2 is true or false, E3 is true or false. Suppose the SAT solver says, suppose there is no perfect matching, then what will happen? If there is no perfect matching, what should you expect to see? Not satisfiable, right? So if there is no matching, then your SAT solver will say not satisfiable, all right? Otherwise, your interpretation is quite direct. Whichever edges have value 1, that will be the edge chosen in the perfect matching, all right? So let's look at another problem of graph coloring. Yes?
Here, number of instance equations you have created.
Yeah.
These are manually created to be submitted to SAT solver.
These are?
The previous slide, please.
Yes.
See here, V1, V2, that instance equations been created.
Yes.
These are manually to be created and submitted to the SAT solver.
Manually to be created, you mean by hand, longhand?
No, not that. That means this interpretation you are making, that
Yes.
E5 and
Yes.
not E2. These all equations been manually interpreted initially before submitting to the SAT solver?
No. So you have to create an automation wherein you actually convert an instance of the problem. You have to have an algorithm for doing that. You need an algorithm for converting the instance of the problem into an instance of SAT.
For each vertex V, look at the incident set of edges, and then you write a clause mutex of each of these edges. Only one of them will be true. That you can do, right?
So for each vertex, you essentially will have 4 parts. In each part, you will have as many edges as there are incident on the vertex, right? So it would be a good exercise for you all to actually write the algorithms that do the reduction, okay? So here we have the question, do we have a K coloring in a given graph? Okay. So these are all questions with answers yes or no. So if you have a K coloring, you need to say yes. If you don't, you say no. So how would you reduce this to SAT? What will your variables be? So I have for every vertex, I could have some color, right? And how many colors do I have? K colors. So nobody told me that I have to use anything lesser than K. I can use all the K colors if I want. If it is colorable by less than K colors, that's also fine, but I can still use the K colors. So for every vertex, it can be colored with any one of those K colors. But what are the constraints then? No other vertex adjacent should be colored with the same color. So how many possible combinations can you have? So if you have a vertex, how many colors can you assign it? K. If you have size of V vertices, how many variables will you have? Number of vertices into K. Because you will have for each vertex, I can assign any one of K colors. So what will your variables be? For each vertex, for each color, I have a Boolean variable BIC, where I is the vertex, C is the color. And my constraints, so this first constraint is the normal constraint of coloring, right? That no two adjacent vertices should have the same color. So it looks something like this. Conjunction for all colors, C going from 1 through K. If vertex I and vertex J are adjacent, then they should not be given the same color. So this is actually interpreted as negation of BIC and BJC, right? BIC means vertex I is assigned color C, BJC means vertex J is assigned color C. If both of them have the color C, that's not something I want. So negation of that is what you get. And I have this conjunction over all colors that will ensure that for no edge, both vertices are given the same color. What is the problem if I only do this? What problem do I face if I just give these constraints? Is it possible that my SAT solver gives me false for all possible colors for a vertex? Right? It's possible. So what I need to do is I need to add this constraint. This says that at least one color is assigned to the vertex. The vertex must be colored with some color. So the conjunction of both of these sets of constraints given to the SAT solver will give me an assignment which will tell me what color I should assign each of my vertices. Clear? Any questions? Yeah. Polynomial? Is the reduction polynomial? So what would my algorithm be for the reduction? Yeah.
I need the value of K. The number of variables which I would have would also be dependent on K.
Yes. So SAT itself is NP complete, right? We are reducing. So graph coloring itself is NP complete. Coloring of a graph, the answer to whether the graph can be colored with K colors is also NP complete. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But the reduction, if it is polynomial, I reduce one NP-complete problem to another NP-complete problem by polynomial reduction.
Yes,
but if the
that's right.
reduction itself is not polynomial, then we are actually solving a unnecessarily solving a harder problem.
No, that's okay. I mean, the thing is that the SAT solvers.
Let me clarify this point. This is the disclaimer that I gave. The disclaimer is that SAT solvers work very well
today.
That is because of the engineering advances in SAT solvers. Right? Now, in terms of complexity, at least in the previous case, we reduced an easier problem to a harder problem. Matching, which can be solved in polynomial time, was reduced to SAT, which is not known to be polynomial time solvable. But we still do that because, in spite of this being a hard problem, the solvers have become so efficient that for large size problems, you can solve it faster by using that solver. Right? So that is the main selling point for using SAT solvers. But in this problem, you see, this is a problem which is NP complete, this is a problem which is NP complete. Anyway, you don't have a sub-exponential algorithm for this. So why do you care if there is an exponential reduction? No, it's just exponential plus exponential. Now, had you had a polynomial time algorithm for this, then I would have cared. Right?
Sir, actually, if you sir. If you have nm number of literals, not literals actually variables, by Boolean variables, then you may end up in 2 power nm clauses. That is, the length itself, the size of the problem itself becomes exponential. And how we will handle that?
That's what I'm trying to say, that you may take an easier problem and take it into the more difficult problem of SAT. Maybe with exponential number of clauses. But if you have a solver which can solve that very quickly for you, in most of the cases, that is not to say that it will always solve it, but 99.999% cases it's solving you very quickly, then you just use that as a tool which is, from an engineering perspective, very efficient. That's why people use it. I mean, it's not nothing else. We don't think about the theoretical complexity of the problem.
So, I mean, just to continue this, a good exercise would then be to look at some of these SAT solvers that are available, freely available today, and try and actually implement these reductions. So, some of them would be ZChef and Minisat. These are, Minisat is better. So, I think if you looked at these SAT solvers and gave them instances of these problems, you'd be surprised at how well these can do, these applications can solve these problems. Okay, so we don't have much time, so I'm going to just go through these last two reductions with you all. Okay, so this is a reduction of vertex cover to SAT. Okay, so here it's very simple to what we did for coloring. With vertex cover, for each vertex, we need to either decide whether the vertex is going to be in the cover or not be in the cover. And the question is, do we have a vertex cover of size k? So what does that mean? I have a list of size k, so it has k parts, and I have to choose which vertices to place here, such that all edges are covered. All right. So I can think of these positions as my colors, and I can decide, do I want to place a vertex in this position in the vertex cover or not, with respect to the constraints of the problem, that is, all the edges are covered. So this is what I do. For each vertex and each position, I have this combination. I mean, you all can definitely think up of better ways to reduce. Okay, so these are all solutions that I have thought of. So in this particular solution, you take a vertex and you look at all possible positions it can take. So you have that many number of variables. Your constraints are going to be as follows. So for each edge that exists in the graph, either of its endpoints should be in the vertex cover. At least one of its endpoints should be in the vertex cover. So this is what you have. For each vertex u adjacent to a vertex v, I either have vertex u in position P or vertex v in position P, and P is my position in the vertex cover, and I have k such positions. Is clear? So, like this I am ensuring that at least one of the edges, one of the endpoints is going to be in some position of the vertex cover. The second thing is, we do not want to assign multiple vertices to be placed in the same position in the vertex cover, because we are looking at it as a list. I might say place vertex 1, vertex 3, vertex 5 in position 1, right. So, that is not what we want. So, we want to ensure that only one vertex is placed in one position. So, this is why we have the second constraint. So, in the second constraint, we are saying that at a position P, if vertex 1 is there, then vertex 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. are not there, or if vertex 2 is there, then the rest of them are not there, and so on. So, the first constraint takes care of the edges, the second constraint takes care of the cover itself. So, this is one possible reduction of vertex cover to set. So, another interesting problem which you all might have seen in an artificial intelligence course is the n-Queens problem, and the n-Queens problem also quite easily gives way to a SAT reduction. Okay. I have not given the Boolean expressions for it, but this is what I would think you should do, is for every queen you have n queens, you have n rows and n columns. So, each queen can be positioned in one of the rows or columns, right. So, you have a Boolean variable representing each queen and its position in the chessboard. Your constraints will be to ensure that no two queens can attack each other. So, one constraint will be that if I have a queen in position in row I, no other queen should be present. If I have a queen in column J, no other queen should be there in column J, and then you have diagonal constraints to ensure that no two queens can attack along the diagonals, all right. And obviously, the last one, as we had seen, is that in the coloring problem every vertex should have a color, each queen should be placed on the chessboard, each queen should have some position. Okay. So, these are some reductions. I would suggest that you all go through that, try and write down the algorithms, and if you all can even implement and test them on some SAT solvers. All right. Thank you.